Hey guys, it's me again, and in this episode of the tutorial I want to show you how to make your first room, including making the brushwork, texturing the brushwork, as well as lighting the room. So go ahead and start Radiant. And we are going to start right off with making the ground plate for our room. Geometry in Radiant is made out of brushes, and to create a brush just hold down left mouse button in the 2D viewport and drag. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag a square, and I'm going to use 512 units for width and height, and then I will move the brush so it aligns with the grid squares. To move a brush, just click anywhere inside the brush and drag it around with left mouse button. So as you can see now, we've created just a flat surface, and currently it says shader not found. So that's because we haven't applied the texture to the brush. But before we are going to do this, we're going to scale our floor plate in the front view, so it aligns with the grid squares. So go ahead, click beneath the bottom surface of the brush and drag it until the brush thickness is 64 units. You would usually like to have 64 units as the default brush thickness or brush depth, just so you know the brush outlines match with the grid squares, which are 64 units in height and width. That's just because on the one hand, if you do this, use 64 units, keep the brush outlines aligned with the grid squares, the map usually turns out better construction-wise. And on the other hand, it also makes it easier to keep an overview once your map gets more complex. If you got lots of brushes overlaying in a 2D viewport and you got lots of different brush width, and it's going to be easy, going to be not so easy to keep an eye on what's where and what you're actually doing, and so that's why you would want to stick to 64 units or one square width for your default brush thickness. Alright, so much for that. Now we have to apply a texture to our brush. This is done using the textures menu. And before we are going to apply the actual texture, we are going to have to decide on a texture category. You see this large list here. It contains all of the texture categories, and what we are going to do is select Common. Common contains all the technical shaders of Radiant. Now you might ask, what's a shader? What's the difference to a texture? It's pretty simple. Imagine a texture as just an image, while a shader is the combination of a texture, so the combination of an image and a script file that communicates with the compiler to give surfaces certain properties. So in the common category, you got a lot of technical shaders. To check out all those shaders, press the T key. So T for textures is going to bring up the texture browser. In here you can see all of the common shaders. You can recognize shaders by the white outline in Radiant. Textures like this one here have no outline, and shaders have a white outline. So what we are going to do is select Cork. The thing is with Cork surfaces are not actually rendered in-game, so they are invisible. The idea behind it is, that you make geometry using the Cork shader, and then you go ahead and actually just texture the surfaces that are visible in-game when you play the map, and leave the other surfaces using cork, so that the engine will only display what actually can be seen. So yeah, go ahead and select cork, and you see the brush will get covered with the cork shader. Alright, then close the texture browser and deselect the brush using the escape key. What we are going to do now is texture the actual floor surface. So click Shift and Control to select the surface. Once we've done that, we are going to have to change texture categories. So go to Textures in the menu bar and navigate to the Base category and choose Base Floor. Then bring up the texture browser again, pressing T for textures, and you can now choose any floor texture you like. I will just go for this one here, the plank floor, and close the texture browser, press Escape to deselect the surface. So as you can see now, our ground plate is done, and we can move on to making our first wall. So we are going to create a new brush. To do this, hold down left mouse button in the top view and just drag. Keep in mind that you want to use 64 units as the brush thickness to keep the brush outlines aligned to the grid squares. And then you see the brush is now using the textures that we previously selected to cover our ground plate. But before we can actually use this brush as our wall, we are going to have to cover the whole brush with cork again. So you could now go to the Textures menu, select Common, press T and select cork. But you could as well, if you undo this change, hitting Ctrl and Z, you can as well use the cork selection button in the icon bar. So if you press this, you will see the whole selection gets covered with the cork texture. That's pretty useful as it speeds up your work, and you don't have to select a common folder every time or select the cork texture every time. Alright, so much for this. And now what we're going to do is, in the front view or the side view, however you like, move up our wall brush so the brush surfaces align, the bottom surface of this should align with the surface of our ground plate. You do this, and you don't do it like this just because it makes more sense for texturing, and you don't actually have any profit from scaling it down so the room would seem scaled off. This is just enough, and it's more it's easier for texturing in the end. So yeah, scale up the wall brush by clicking above the top surface and dragging it with left mouse button. Give it a bit of height. I'm going to go for 56 units, so you have enough space to stand in there and maybe jump. So what's left is the texture for our wall brush surface, and to texture it, press Escape to deselect the brush, and then press Shift and Control to select the wall surface. Then go to the Textures menu to change the texture category, go to Base again, but this time choose Base Wall. Then hit T to bring up the texture browser, and now we can decide for any wall texture. I'm going to go for the concrete texture. So select that, and you see the surface gets covered with the concrete texture. Alright, so one of our four, sorry about that, that was my Avast security program. So we got one of our four walls. and 3 are left to go. So we could, just like we made the other wall, create a new brush, cover it with caulk and cover the wall surface with the concrete texture. But you could as well just select the brush using shift and left mouse button and copy the brush. Copying brushes in Radiant is really simple. All you have to do is use the spacebar and you see the brush gets duplicated. So what we are going to do now is rotate it so it fits this side of our ground surface. To rotate, you can use the icon bar. There are several transforming options here, like you can rotate around the z-axis, flip at the z-axis, and rotate around the y-axis and the x-axis, obviously. So yeah, go ahead and choose rotate along the z-axis, and the whole brush gets rotated 90 degrees along the z-axis. So all you gotta do now is click inside the brush and move it so it fits this side of the ground surface. Yeah, now you are basically just going to repeat this step until you got all wall brushes in place. So duplicate the brush hitting the space key and use the z-axis rotation to rotate it and move it in place. And one more time, hit space to duplicate, press this button here to rotate around the z-axis and drag it into place. So as you can see now, the basic structure of our room is done, but there are still a couple of things missing. One pretty basic thing you should know is that this gray space here around our room is called the void. And what you have to do is seal your map from the void, because otherwise, the compiler will complain and it won't let you compile and start the map. So what we're going to have to do is seal up this hole here. And we are going to do this by adding a skybox and a small ceiling. So first of all, I'm going to add the ceiling brushes. I'm going to make a new brush, here in a side view. Hold down left mouse button and drag a new brush, 64 units in width and height, so it aligns with the grid squares. And now we have to cover it with the caulk texture so the invisible surfaces don't get rendered, even though we can't see it. And to do this, press the caulk selection button again, and you see the selection gets covered with caulk. So what we're going to do now is cover the visible surfaces with the texture. There are two ways of doing this. As we've done before, we could select the surface, holding down Shift and Control, and going to the Textures menu and selecting Base Wall, pressing T for Textures, and then pressing on a concrete texture. But we could also just, if we want, we can just copy the texture from one of our wall surfaces to this surface. To do this, you have to click with the middle mouse button onto any surface, and this will copy the texture information of the surface. So click middle mouse button on the wall, for example, will copy the texture information from the wall. And if I now hold down Shift and press middle mouse button again on this surface, it's going to paste the texture. So if you want to copy and paste textures, click middle mouse button on a surface to copy the texture information and hold down Shift and press middle mouse button to paste the information. And this works with any surface pretty much. This is a pretty useful feature, as it obviously, you can skip a lot of steps, changing the texture category and stuff. You can just click and click again and the texture is there. It speeds up your workflow quite a lot if you get comfortable with it. So I recommend you mess around with that a bit. as it's really useful to learn. So as we got one side of our ceiling now, we can simply copy that like we did with the walls and rotate them and move them into place. So yeah, select the ceiling brush, pressing shift and left mouse button, hit the space bar to duplicate, and use the Z-axis rotation to rotate and then move it into place. So as you can see now, those two brushes are overlapping. Usually you would really want to prevent brushes from overlapping, as it's bad for the compiler and also causes Z-fighting. Z-fighting is, I don't know if you've seen it in games, but when two brushes overlap, there is a conflict between the texture of this brush and the texture of this brush, and it causes this weird effect, So what you want to do is scale this brush so they don't overlap. And we can already scale it here again because it will be the same on the other side. Alright, so two sides left. I'm going to select this brush and this brush using shift and left mouse button and copy both of them, hitting the spacebar, and then rotate 90 degrees along the Z-axis 2 times and move them into place. Alright, so that's our ceiling. And you got this large opening in here still. So we are going to have to fill that with a sky to seal the map from the void. Making a skybox is pretty simple. What you want to do is create a new brush inside this hole in the ceiling and move it up so it just really barely covers the outlines of the hole. Then, as we've done with the other brushes, click the cork selection button, and you see that all the surfaces get covered with cork, so nothing gets rendered that we can't see. And select the visible surface. And now what we are going to have to do is change the texture category to the skies category. So go to the textures menu. You might have to use this extension here, and then go to skies down here. Click that, and then press T to bring up the texture browser and select the sky. I'm going to use the hell sky. As you can see here, there are some thumbnails with a white outline and some without. Skies are shaders, so you really need to select a sky with a white outline, because if you don't, it will just use an image and it won't look like a real sky. It won't emit light. It will be solid and it will look weird. So pay attention to really using a sky shader with a white outline. So that's it pretty much already for adding a sky to our room. Deselect the surface using the escape key, and our room is almost done. What it still lacks is maybe a spawn point. Actually, you really need a spawn point, because if you don't have one, you can't launch the map. And we are also going to place a weapon and maybe a health bubble and some light entities to bring in some light. So first of all, we are going to add a spawn point. So click somewhere inside the room with the right mouse button, and then a menu will pop up that I like to call the entity menu, because in here you got access to all kinds of entities, which would be ammo, weapons, or team entities for capture the flag. But what we are going to do is select the info submenu and choose info player deathmatch. This is a normal deathmatch spawn, So a spawn for free for all or duel or team deathmatch. As you can see, mine is currently stuck in the ceiling here because, you know, Radiant remembers the last coordinates from the brush from the most recent brush. So just, you know, click the spawn and drag it down to the floor. You can see this little arrow here inside the spawn entity. It shows the view direction you are going to have when spawning. So obviously it's not optimal at not ideal at the moment, because you are going to look at the wall. And to fix this, we are simply going to use the Z-axis rotation and rotate it okay. So apparently this is bugged. Alright, there's an alternative way to do it. If you open up the entity inspector using the end key, you can see a bit of information about the spawn entity, and there is a key you can set for the angle of the spawn entity, and the key is simply angle. So if you type in angle here and add a value of 180 and click enter, you see the spawn direction rotates. So yeah, unfortunately the Z-axis rotation is broken for spawn, so you're going to have to use this method. You know, select the spawn, hit N to bring up the entity inspector, and enter a new key, angle, and the value of 180. The angle value depends on, you know, your top view. You got 0 degrees here, 90 degrees here, 180 here, 270 here, and then 360 or 0 again. So yeah, sorry about this. I didn't know that was broken. Alright, so move the spawn point wherever you want it. And that's it pretty much for adding spawn. Was pretty simple, wasn't it? So one more thing we are going to do is add a weapon and a few health entities. This works the same way as adding the spawn. So use right click to bring up the entity menu and go to the weapon submenu. I'm going to place a rocket launcher. You can see you got all weapons listed here. I'm going to place a rocket launcher by just clicking it, and you can see the entity shows up here in a 2D viewport. So yeah, place it wherever you want and press escape to deselect it. The same thing works for health entities. Health entities are in the item submenu. When you right click and then open the entity menu, go to item and select item health, which would be a 25 HP health bubble. So if you want to place another health entity now, you can just, like for brushes, duplicate it using the space key. So if you press space, you are going to have another one. Alright, so much for placing entities. I'm going to make a quick save of the map so nothing gets lost, you know, in case of a sudden hard drive crash or anything similar. So yeah, choose any map name and save the map using Control and S or File and Save. Alright, so one more thing to do before we are going to compile the map is we have to light up the room. We already have the light from the sky as a pretty large light source, but I don't think it's going to be enough to give the room a decent level of brightness. So what we are going to do is we are going to place a light entity. This works the same way as placing items or spawns. You click right click in the top view to bring up the entity menu and select light. So there you go, and Radiant is going to ask you about an Intensity value. I think 30 is a pretty reasonable value for light entities. So enter 30 if you haven't already and click OK. As you can see now, the light is placed and selected. I'm going to move it to the center, to half of the room height, and somewhere here, and duplicate it with the space key, and have another one here for more consistent lighting. Alright, so this is going to add some more brightness to our level. There are some more ways of lighting up your level, especially for testing the level. You know, at the beginning when you don't have so many light sources, you can have world lighting in the map. To do this, you know, select the brush, press N to bring up the entity inspector, and now we got two options. One option would be using the min light key. Obviously it's going to add a minimum level of light or brightness to your map. So if you want to use this, you know, enter a value of maybe 20, but only use this for testing your map really, because it's going to look pretty bad. So yeah, you could do this, press enter to add it to the world spawn brushes. By default, all brushes are members of the world spawn entity, so yeah, that's why it says class name world spawn here. And the other option you got is using the ambient key. What ambient does is it takes existing light sources and increases their brightness. So, for example, if you add ambient to the world spawn, our light entities will appear brighter than they would without. So rather than just having a consistent level of lightness in your map like you would have with using min light, it will just bright up existing light sources. So if you want to use ambient, you know, a value of 20 is fine, just like for min light. I'm going to delete min light because we don't need it. We already have two light entities here, and yeah, so select it and hit delete key or pair. It's going to remove it. So yeah, close the entity inspector, and now we are pretty much ready to compile the map. So save the map once again, hitting Ctrl and S, and go to the BSP menu in the menu bar. So now here you got a bunch of options. You know, some compiler strings are labeled with single, some are labeled with single test, and some are labeled with just test, and some are labeled with final. The difference is, you know, there are 3 compile stages during the compile process of a map. Single is basically saying that you can skip certain compile stages during the process and just, for example, compile light without changing the geometry. It's not really important for us now. What's important for us is the test settings, so the test compile strings, as that is what we are going to use for testing. So select the first one here, or the second one, it doesn't really matter. The second one will make the compile process last a bit longer, but it's not really relevant at the moment as our map is really small. So yeah, check the first or the second one, it doesn't matter, and just click it, and you will see a window pop up, and that is the compiler compiling the map. So yeah, that's it for compiling the map already. It's done now, and we can launch Wolfcam and check out our first room. So launch Wolfcam, and once you've done that, bring up the console and enter \map and the name of your map file. So in my case EP3, because it is the 3rd episode of the tutorial. So hit enter and it will load the map. Alright, here we go. As you can see, we spawned exactly where we placed the spawn point, and the rocket launcher in front of us and the two HP bubbles, our ceiling, the sky, the walls, the floor. So yeah, that's it pretty much for creating your first room. I suggest you revise this a couple of times, watch the video 3 or 4 times, and then try to make the room again without the help of the video. If you can't make it, go back to the video, check out what you did wrong, and see if you can get it better. So yeah, I hope the video was okay. It's pretty difficult for me to explain these things in English, as I don't usually talk a whole lot of English during the day. So yeah, I apologize for that. However, I'm going to try to make another tutorial soon. So until then, see you.